Greetings, travelers.
Woohoo! We
Woo.
are in the last episode of Antiquities August.
Oh my gosh, this has been a fun month,
It has.
to say the
It's
least.
been a really fun month, and we're about to go into spooky season, which, as you know, I'm super excited about because I love spooky season.
It's been code orange for a while. I've finally got stocked up on Booberry and Frankenberry, so I'm good to go. And then the Little Debbie pumpkin spice rolls are in too. So my diabetes is back on track.
I was going to say, your diabetes is going to have a heart attack, and my inability to eat gluten anymore, I'm not celiac, but I just can't, eliminates all of those as options. So thank you for waving those in my face, Mark, and whatever.
But they're going in the Wayback Machine snack pile for Bo.
Oh, you gotta love the Wayback Machine snack pile. Okay, so we're excited today because we talk about these particular entities, beings, creatures, whatever the word is we want to use, quite a bit.
Yep.
And so it's going to be neat, but I guess we had no choice since she bullied her way in here, but to bring back one of Eerie Travel's regulars, Val Willis is with us.
No, I just barged through Erica's front door and said, "What do you got?"
Yeah, so
yeah.
I want to do an Eerie
After the infamous Roo episode, I'm excited to see where this one goes.
Oh, sexually transmitted curses. Okay, so we're talking about
the
fairies.
Good people.
The good people.
The good people.
Fae, fairies, tricksters. Okay, the good people. Keep saying that. I will run you over with my good people way back machine is what I'll do.
Do you like to call them the Shay or the She or anything like that?
I know the She is the Celtic variant. So there's different variants depending on where you're going for. The most common or most notorious are those based off of Celtic lore.
Yep.
But the most known are actually the superstitions that developed in the late 1800s, early 1900s during this weird fairy faith trend in the Celtic countries.
Yeah, right before Victorian spiritualism. It was right about that time.
In fact, you hear a lot of stories covered about like Michael McCleary and his wife in the Black Stocking story. It goes around. There was even a hopscotch rhyme about it.
Okay, wait a minute. Okay, you're going too fast. Ease down. So we're obviously getting in the Wayback Machine. What is this that you're talking about?
Okay, let me take a step back. So Celtic culture started around the same time as the ancient Greeks. The only difference between the two was that with the Greeks, they had the oracles who wrote down their history and started that practice.
Okay.
Where the Celtics, all we have is what their enemies recorded of them and the architecture that was left behind. So there's a lot of unknowns about their lore because they used druids to tell their oral tradition.
Okay.
So they would pass down orally. A majority
pass down orally.
Stop.
You mean orally passed down?
Yeah, you know what
stories? I mean? Wow, this sexually transmitted curses is already off to a good start. They're doing oral. Okay. Wow. She's bright red. You guys
Druids do it orally. That's our new t-shirt.
Orally.
That's our new t-shirt, Axolotl.
We're gonna need that.
So eventually, fast forward, you have the Gaul Wars, and this is where, interestingly enough, Julius Caesar recorded most of what we know of the Celtic faith a little bit and their stories and things like that. And strangely enough, there is a very famous story involving Julius Caesar and the fairies.
Ooh.
Him and Mark Antony hooked up with Gloriana, who was the queen of the Fae.
Wow. So everybody's just tossing it to everybody else here in this.
She was quite the player.
I see that. Like this went a whole what? Val, for being so pink-skinned right now from embarrassment. How did you take this? Okay, so the
we're not even 5 minutes in.
No, I'm not. We just hit
But
5 minutes. So
supposedly their son is Oberon, who later is known more famously as the King of Fae, along with his queen, what's Titania or Titania, depending what, who also were featured in Shakespeare. So this it's crazy. It's such a crazy string of connections.
So I just need to go back so that I'm caught up the way everybody else is. So we have the oral that occurs with the druids. And then we have Mark Antony and who else?
Julius Caesar
Julius. Okay, so Caesar and Mark Antony
has
not
a half-Fae child.
Not only Cleopatra, but tossing it to the Faerie Queen.
Yes.
And has a half-Fae child named what?
Oberon.
Who
has cloven hoof feet and horn.
Yeah, that's again not this is according to what I forget which philosopher was it, Pompey or I forget.
I don't even remember.
One of them made this was to deify Julius.
Well, I understand because we also have the oral from the druids, so that we got to clarify this. So then okay, so they have a half-Fae child that then becomes the king of the Fae. And has a queen named Tatiana, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
And they're known to be mischief makers, and they oversee the Fae realm. And they weren't exactly known to be nice to humans. And most Fae, I think that's the most interesting thing about the Celtic Fae and even the superstitious Fae, is that they both retain that them doing you a favor, they may see it as a favor, but you may not, right? There's always that danger. And you have to be careful because they'll make demands of you. So like in I redid this book called The Fairy Faith of the Celtic Countries, and it's just eyewitness accounts during the early 1900s. This man and a few of his colleagues went out and collected stories. One of the stories tells
we'll put a link to this, Traveler, so you have a link to this book that she put together. It's really pretty too because she did a lot of pictures in it too. So they went out and collected.
So this man is traveling. He had just gotten married. He's traveling back home from, events. And the Fae stop him and says, "You need to sing a dance for me." And he's like, I just got married. I want to go home to my wife because this is a celebration. And they're like, "You need to sing a dance for us now or you'll be punished." So he blows them off. And when he gets home, he hears his wife. Things are moving in the home, but he can't see or touch her. For a whole year, he said the cows were always milked, the bread was always baked, and he could always hear her and know that she was there, but he could never see her and then at the year mark, their first anniversary, the magic wore off. But that's sort of like the weird punishment systems that sometimes would unfold, or trickery that would unfold with the Fae.
Wow. So just to clarify, if anybody didn't want to have to deal with their spouse, just piss off the Fae, and you may get a year reprieve, is basically what you're saying. Is that how that works?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
I'm not saying I've tried that, but we're just
you did try it. I know, it's fine. we're used to you.
I have some previous marriages, so.
And it's crazy because eventually as it transitioned from like a religious mythology base to more of a superstition base, you then started seeing a lot of changeling lore starts blowing up.
So what is a changeling for anybody who doesn't know?
Typically, most of the stories talk about a baby being swapped with a Fae baby. Like, this is not my baby. It's crying too much. You see this in Outlander. Outlander does a great changeling nod because you see her watch a woman place the baby in a hollow tree and says, "Please give me my baby back," and leave it there.
Oh, wow.
And then you come back the next day and it's supposed to be your baby again. If it died, it was a changeling.
Yeah, if it died, it was a changeling. If it lived, you have your baby back.
Okay. That sounds like a horrible way to approach a colicky baby. Like,
I think we're skipping one important thing. There are two courts of the Fae. There are the Seelie and the Unseelie. And the Seelie are basically the blessed. They're the good ones. They're the ones that give you things and help you and all that. And then the Unseelie, you take that for what it means, and basically the trickster ones. They're the ones that, want to mess with you. And you don't know which ones you're dealing with.
Well,
They're not going to tell you.
No, well, and they're likely to tell you an untruth. I mean, if if you're unseelie, you're probably not going to go, listen, I'm about to ruin your life.
Yeah.
But then again, you might. I mean, I suppose if I was in the unseelie court, I would probably be like, hey, oh no, you can have this thing. Let me tell you what I'm going to take from you.
You're going to be able to dance forever, but you're never going to stop. Yeah, that's
yeah. And I like
and it'll be disco.
And the crazy thing about the Fae is they have animal forms, they have very human forms, they have a combination of the two. Sometimes they're monstrous. So, like, for example, another common, more Irish-based one is the Marrow. You have an Irish folktale called the Soul Cages, and it's basically if a sailor drowns because their soul's been captured in a soul cage, which looks very strangely much like a lobster cage. And that's why they don't come back, right? And that's because that's what the Marrow eat. And these are almost like a creature from the Black Lagoon kind of version of a mermaid, right? That live in the dark waters around Ireland is specifically where they live. But they always describe them as male or female with solid black eyes, very scaly, and teeth like sharks.
You know, it's what I think is really interesting, and we haven't quite touched on this yet. I mean, you talked a little bit about the history, but part of what we're talking about is stuff that was discussed before Christianity sort of ballooned on the planet as a religious belief system, because we measure time with, before Christ and then after death. That's what we've adopted. But all of this stuff predates that. The Seelie, Unseelie are before, angels and demons were a thing that was talked about, right?
Right.
And what's very interesting about this, and, I'm not touching on angels and demons. I'm not getting into a religious conversation on this. But what I find fascinating is the eyewitness accounts of interacting with the Fae, whether they saw them or just have evidence of them being there, right?
Right.
And the different kinds of Fae. So, like the story that you were talking about of the guy that couldn't see his wife, aka what Mark tried to do with his previous ex-wife, that Fae he ran into looked like a person, right?
No.
What did they look like?
It's described as the good people.
Okay, you've said that like 50 times. I feel like that's one of those things that I want to punch you for saying. Well, what does the good people mean?
So it's just when they know they're dealing with Fae, but they don't know which type of Fae. And it's a way of not insulting them. And there's even stories of the Fae correcting them and say, we're the good people. And it's like, sure you are.
Nod, wink, wink.
In what we've been working on recently, Erica, with Smoky Mountain, where we talk about the Cherokee and the Nowinaway, they're higher beings that have helped them do things. It's very similar stories. In fact, almost identical in many traditions and stuff. And that's why we think it's the same thing, just the Cherokee term. And I think that's what happens on all this as we travel around looking into these type of legends, and particularly in the Appalachian Range, which becomes the Scottish Highlands and the Irish Hills. It's the same range, just, we did a super Brexit at the end of Pangea.
I think the interesting thing is in that collection, that more superstitious based eyewitness accounts in the early 1900s, is a lot of them are almost alien-like. So they're like thin, they're small, with large black oval eyes and things like that, and sometimes have wings, sometimes don't, sometimes have some sort of outfit on and hat, and sometimes not.
The dryads and nymphs get that a lot. The same.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. So you talk about nymphs and dryads, and both of those are very nature-based Fae,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
They come in that. And then you were just talking about, we talk about like mermaids and and sirens. Those are the two, which are things that lure people to their death in the ocean, right?
Mhm.
What I think is interesting is like I always think of mermaids not as like the beautiful Ariel bottom half fish, kind of, beautiful creatures of the sea. I always looked at them more like how they were represented in like Harry Potter and things like where they're unpleasant, because that seems actually to me to be much more likely that they would be more of a warrior sort of species and not necessarily humanoid, because being humanoid is not very aerodynamic in water.
No, and it's interesting because most of the water fae in particular usually are like kelpies in the Gortash, and that's a
So
Scottish version.
what's a kelpie for those that may
So
not know?
it is a magnificently beautiful horse that usually is seen near lakes and rivers. Same thing with the Gortash, and it tempts you almost to ride it, but once you hop on, it jumps into a lake where you can't escape and eats you.
Oh, that's delicious. Isn't that the kudzu kelpie, which is
That's our critter down in Florida. We're still researching and getting reports about.
It's interesting. When you go to Scotland, they have a giant kelpie statue near their airport, near in Edinburgh, is this beautiful statue of 3 kelpies coming out of the water. Go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say one of the most famous water fae that a lot of people don't associate with the fae, but is totally the fae, is the Lady of the Lake with Arthur. She's a Celtic, Merlin summons her to bring forth Excalibur and gives it to Arthur's dad, and then Arthur gets it later.
Where you start developing the Britannic version of a lot of fae.
Yeah, that's what they start melding it in. Yeah.
So you get like the Cat King stories, which you see in the Sandman series, kind of plays off of the Cat King and the idea of it.
What is the Cat King?
Oh, the Cat King is, there's this strange belief that with each, because you talk about 9 lives of a cat. So as they transpire through these lives, and it's more like a reincarnation of 9 lives, they become more intelligent. And the oldest cats among all the cats is the Cat King. And he's supposed to be able to take on human form in some stories. He talks and controls every cat in the world. And there's like these horrible stories. And you know what? Anime covers this. The Ancient Magus Bride covers this story. There's a story, a folktale about how a woman who was very sick had a cat, and it turned out that her cat was the Cat King. And a alchemist came to town and told the husband that he should feed her the cat. And, so he started slaughtering, but he didn't have the heart to take her cat from her. So the cats started going missing in the town because he was trying to feed her all these cats, until eventually they found him dead, or the Cat King took revenge and all the cats came and killed him and ate him. And it's like this crazy, gruesome, grim fairy tale kind of vibe. But there's like all these crazy stories where it's this crazy aspect. So
We
And,
know
the Dead Boy Detective series that just came out on Netflix too.
yeah, no, they have a very sensuous Cat King on that one. Very sensuous. And then I was going to say, if you look at the what is it, the Cassandra Clare books have the Seelie and Unseelie court in them for a more up to date, right?
Yeah, so the Dresden Files with Jim Butcher, he does a lot with them as well.
Well, actually, you know what? That's in what's it called? Suki.
Okay, True Blood.
Yes, True Blood.
The Suki Stackhouse series.
Yes,
Yeah, I just have to say.
Now, one of the fae I want to get into a little bit is because it is the 50th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons. So we have to talk a little bit about the elves, which at one point, elves and fae in British Celtic lore were synonymous.
Right.
Just
and that's
different type.
Because of Nordic influence.
Right.
Because they associated, because there was Freya, and then her twin brother Frey was considered the king of elves.
The ones that water Yggdrasil, I forget. They're the Fae that live along the
Udine,
roots.
something like
Yeah.
that?
They bring water up and down the tree, and they're Fae as well. But the elves, or the Germans have it. They call them the Schrat.
Schrock,
And yeah,
is
and in the
another
Grove folk,
one.
I forget Sweden. They're called the Grove folk, Elvor, I think. And then the Elf folk in Danish. And my favorite were for Iceland was the Spey wives, which were the Fae, the elves that you could marry, and they would bring honor to your clan.
And it's crazy because a lot of Slavic lore and earlier Elven Fae borderlines and overlaps, that there was a tradition during winter solstice that all the wives would leave the husbands and children in the cabin and disappear for like days and then come back because they were serving the elves as thanks for keeping them safe from invaders and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
and they're the ones that wind up working for Krampus.
yeah.
So,
We okay. Oh,
that's how elves get associated with Christmas, which is
Yeah.
a completely different story. But we'll do that in December.
yeah, no, but I need to unpack a couple things here. So let's talk about elves for a moment, because one of the things that's interesting about those stories, right, is, you take Tolkien and some of the other people that wrote stories, making them an alternate race, and you bring up Dungeons and Dragons. They're, of course, in Dungeons and Dragons and a lot of different places and stuff like that. But what's interesting to me is that the look and feel of the way they describe elves is very much how they describe the dryads and how they describe the nymphs and things like this, is these slightly pointy-eared, very slender creatures, right? But
Right.
I feel like going back to when these stories happened is they were shorter creatures. They weren't the same height as what humans were. They were tiny,
Not
right?
necessarily. That it was more of a modern trend. In the older times, they were just as
They
tall
were,
as us, if not
just as
taller.
tall or even taller. A giant like Freya and Frey were both considered part giant.
I'm gonna try to pronounce this guy's name. What was it? It was Gan Kana is a Celtic. You'd have been all over this guy, Erica.
Oh,
he
would
was,
I? Tell me.
his name literally translates to love talker.
Ooh.
Yeah, and he was known to be very alluring, but also very enchanting with his voice. And the only way you know he's a fae is because he doesn't have a shadow. That's
interesting, because that goes to like vampire lore.
Exactly.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
also, if he's talking, the birds stop singing to listen to him.
Because as they should. Don't tell John.
Yeah.
I'm excited
Now,
about
the only problem is if you ever do kiss him, he vanishes, and then you go on longing for him for forever, and you'll die of desire.
Well, that sounds like some really bad relationships all of us have been in our life.
I think that sounds like something out of your Twilight series. But
yes, I was about to say.
No, but it's always interesting.
Did he wait? Does his skin sparkle?
Yes, it does. So now the opposite of that was the what's her face, Leanna, the Leanna she's the fairy mistress.
Yeah,
and she's like the pretty one, the Irish, but she's a solitary. She's not like him, where there's a few of him. She was solitary, and then she inspires her lovers to achieve greatness.
And
the one that supposedly bumped into. She's maybe the one who bumped into Julius Caesar and all this, supposedly, over history and all that. She supposedly really cares for her, but she was the one Yeats wrote about because supposedly he met her and inspired him.
In fact, the first real show that I ever saw that actually put her into their content was The Ancient Magus Bride, and she let the old man live a full life. And it was like this. She's a huge romantic for those that she inspires, and it's usually she tries to let them cheat their epitome before she takes them, but
maybe they're juicier if they're successful.
I don't know, but it's also like a weird. But when you look at her lore, it's very interesting because it's almost the same as the Banshee a little,
very
right?
much. very much
It's-
water.
What is the banshee?
So banshee is usually a fae spirit or a spirit that's become a fae that's part of your family. It's very interesting because you can become fae. There's a huge, like, long list of things that can happen to you either upon death or while living that can turn you fae, which is very interesting too. But you would hear banshee sing outside your home, and that would be warning that death was coming to someone in the immediate household.
They were keening, Keen, keening. And a banshee keen was the sound of death. And
Well, it's interesting because when you hear the term banshee and what you see in a lot of stories and things like that,
Or like scary creatures.
is scary, and the wail. It's not a song or anything like it's a scream, a very loud scream.
It's like a mourner's grief wail is what it's supposed to be intended as, or like the howling winds and a combination of stuff. But
well, in Iceland, the way the winds blow, that would be all the time. You'd think banshees were coming because that wind can take your car door off. So what the heck? So we have that. We have these things. What about the small? Because leprechauns are supposed to be fae.
Well, the small ones that we get into where it kind of changes, and the more we think of a more modern fairy, Faire instead of Faere, these are a bit more like the pixies, is where that kind of comes from, and then the puka.
The puka,
The puka is one of my favorites. We'll talk about him.
So he's almost like a mini satyr, right?
Yeah,
that's the best way. He's like a little goat boy. He's about the size of a 10-year-old, is how he's often described. And there's even Castle Puka, which is said to be haunted or guarded by an actual puka to this day. Yep. People claim to see and hear him around there. But there's even stories of the puka trading a child's clothes for doing farm work. Like it's like they bargain.
Well, they were shape changers, so they turn into horses and rabbits and goats and humans. And that's where we get Puck. Again, Shakespeare took the puka and turned him into Puck for Midsummer Night's Dream. Now, one of my favorite things about him was, what was it? He used to, if you leave a plate of food out at night for him, he would come and do your chores at night. But if you didn't leave a plate of food out for him, that's when he would break your property and cause all kinds of trouble and stuff like that. So he's the one where it becomes the leave an apple pie on your windowsill for the fae overnight. You bake two, like one for your family and one for him. But it's funny because puka in Old English basically means demon. So he really does have that mischievous brownie like texture to him. So yeah, he's not always nice. He's not always nice.
And we probably should define what a brownie is too.
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will get into the tiny fae, which is exciting. Greetings, travelers. It's Erica, one of your favorite co-hosts from Erie Travels. Don't tell Mark I said that. But I wanted to offer you a very unique opportunity. You can always advertise with us here at the Erie Travels podcast or on one of our live shows. If you're interested, you can email info@erietravels.com or go to our website, erietravels.com, and use the Contact Us form. We would love to hear about your great product and be able to share it with all of our travelers. And don't forget, as Mark always says, we'll see you on the other side.
Most know Florida as the land of endless sunny beaches, but the state is home to numerous eerie legends and mysterious creatures. The Everglades is home to the elusive skunk ape. In Key West lies an uncanny doll reputed to have a life of its own. Join Mark Muncy and illustrator Carrie Schultz as they uncover the history behind the state's creepiest stories and unusual locations. The Dark Side of the Sunshine State, presented in Erie, Florida, from History Press.
And we're back. So let's talk about the tiny Fae, shall we?
The brownie.
So what is a brownie? Other than one of my favorite desserts on the planet that I can't eat anymore because I'm gluten-free. So.
I have to say that my favorite rendition of a brownie has to be from Spiderwick, because he's this little house spirit that you want to leave like honey and crackers for, and he will protect your house, keep it well kept. It's the reason why you're not collecting cobwebs as fast as your neighbor, but you piss him off and he destroys your shits. He gets angry, and then you have to appease him with more crackers and more honey. Like, I love that.
So
variant.
is he small? Is he supposed to be tiny?
He's supposed to be this tiny little creature.
Well, it's interesting.
And he's just like, he's almost like a little goblin type creature.
But he is much more a household spirit, which I always thought was weird. Willow made him wild and
yeah,
that stuff. But the brownies were more. They lived in barns and houses and shoe stores. I mean, that's the cobbler's elf was basically brownies. You'd never see them. Really, that's the thing. They're kind of they're in the wood, they're in the barn, they're in the rafter, all that. And as long, again, if you leave them food and drink, or they really like cream. Yeah, they're not lactose intolerant, and they like gluten. They like baked bread and cake.
I like baked bread and cake too. It's just parts of my body don't like baked bread and cake. So
yeah. But if you don't reward them, your milk will all turn bad. Your bread will all go moldy instantly, and they'll start breaking crap. They throw tantrums, and they will rearrange your house like a poltergeist almost.
Well, that's unpleasant. You know what I think is funny is like even these ones that are quote unquote helpful have that whole streak to them where like if you don't exchange with me, you're done. What about since we're touching on this subject, I went to Iceland and they have the little people. That's what they call them. And they live in the hills underground. They call them little people. And people to this day swear to seeing these little people and seeing the little mushroom houses and stuff like that. The little people, though, are supposed to kind of look like gnomes.
Yeah.
But, we think of gnomes like garden gnomes and stuff like that. But that's a no. My mother, who's passed, swore out in front of our house that had gnomes. She swore up and down there were gnomes.
Box Tower.
But I was gonna say my favorite is the 16th century Swiss alchemist Paracelsus. He wrote about them quite a bit. He studied them. He supposedly had several of them that he could study and watch, and they could move through stone as fast as a fish through water, according to his documentation.
All I can think every time I come across that information, I just think of Gargamel and the Smurfs.
Yes. Marcellus would probably like that very much because but he was pretty some of the stuff he wrote about is amazing to me, and I wish we could study it scientifically instead of allegorically, because it is very cool, his writings. And he talked about gnomes quite a bit. He was the one who basically coins the term red caps as the evil gnomes.
Yeah.
And red cap it's interesting because there's different versions of what people think a red cap is. But what was his version of a red cap?
A lot like the D&D creature.
Yeah, they were more dwarvish looking. They were bulkier, stronger. They had a paralytic touch. If they touched you, it was almost like an electric shock, and he didn't know what electricity was, but that's what he was describing it like. That the hair on your head would stand, and you would get pimples on your arms, and it's funny that and they're a bit more leprechaun style, which is another type of fae, but that's different. But versus the regular gnomes, which were generally again tried shy and avoided people and lived out in the woods and lived in the rocks. But the red hats like to mess with people. They like to break your wagon wheels and things like that because you were driving on their stone.
Yes. How dare you?
Well, that's just ridiculous.
They own the rocks. How dare you?
We talk about our gnomes of Bach Tower. They're very territorial, and they and as long as they brought them that sacred stone, they stopped messing with that. And if we did an episode on that, we'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah, no, we did, and it's just fascinating to me because we have people that appear to have some sort of fae in their house that's taking their stuff, like their shiny objects. And one of our listeners had all of her Disney pins taken.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's just interesting to me because you go, well, what is that? Like, what kind of? Because let's go back. The Tooth Fairy is supposed to be a fae, right? But the Tooth Fairy
More of a
version,
pixie, but
Yeah, more of a pixie, but
a
Which
pixie's
is
a
a type
fairy.
of fairy.
Like,
pixie, they have wings.
Yeah.
Does that
and they
make them
fly
not a fae?
around? Not all things fly. The Spriggan don't fly. They're like little armored, like tree dwarf people that protect the Fey realm.
Okay, that's fine. But so Tooth Fairy, going back to my point, I'm regretting doing this episode. Going back to my point, the Tooth Fairy is a flying fae, right? Like that's part of the thing. But most of the Tooth Fairy tales that are not like us putting $1 under our kid's pillow are not pleasant stories.
No, they do a lot worse stuff. Yeah,
and it's interesting with the Tooth Fairy because there's also a lot of witch lore that gets tangled into that side, and that's where you also see happen in the Britannic Fae realm too. So like you have terms like the Red Robin. A Red Robin is a red-haired witch, which I always thought was a fascinating like coined term. And then another coined term that I thought completely made up, and then I had to do digging when it was brought up in Ancient Magus Bride, which is probably one of the best Fae.
I know you keep bringing it up. We'll put a link. We'll put a link.
But she's a slave beggy, and a slave beggy was someone who attracts Fae, not necessarily sees them or can interact or control them, but they're almost like a hive for Fae activity.
Oh, that doesn't sound pleasant at all.
No.
And then there's the Tuatha Del Danann, which are the high Fae. They are the golden ones, and they're from Celtic as well. They supposedly materialized in a cloud of mist from the northern sea, and they carried magic items with them that gave them their powers. They were immortal like all the others, but they had like powers. Like one was the Stone of Destiny. That was supposedly the Stone of Scone, where the Irish and Scottish kings had to be knighted, was on that rock.
Yeah.
And then
supposedly the Wild Hunt was involved with them later.
Yeah, that was with the Spear of Lug, which never missed. And then the Shining Sword of Nuada, which was the Sword of Light, which could dispel truth from lies and dispense justice. And that supposedly is Excalibur. And then my favorite is the Cauldron of Dagda, which was which unlimited food and drink to the worthy.
That's not as fun as the wizard Mananan, who has a pig that can never die.
That's true too. Yeah, he's good eating. So
he fed an entire village that way.
Yeah. The other thing about the cauldron is it could heal the dead.
That's right.
How do you heal the dead? They're dead.
It brought them back, and and all this. But yeah, the Tuatha, they all had charm, skills, and elegance and cleverness, and they supposedly ruled Ireland for 4,000 years. So that's almost like the the ancient ones in Samaria that in King Lear, they lived 200,000 years and ruled, 8 of them ruled, and supposedly these are descendants of theirs. So
yeah.
Well, that's bad math as far as I'm concerned. But
ancient people weren't great at
math. No. But let's talk about the Wild Hunt for a moment, because the Wild Hunt is something really fascinating.
Yeah.
So the Wild Hunt, and this is something you could get drawn into and then not be able to escape, right? Isn't that the whole point of the Wild Hunt?
It's to forebode a catastrophe of a war or a plague, and will bring death to one who witnesses them.
And they would pick the greatest warrior that they thought was worth their time to hunt, and to take him out of the fight so that the war would last longer.
And it's often described, sometimes they're souls of the dead, sometimes they're ghostly dogs, sometimes fairies, valkyries, and even elves.
And so sometimes it's led by Odin. It's led by whoever king, Oberon. It's led by whatever king they currently have. and it's all these spectral hunters and stuff like that. But if you survive it, you basically go to Valhalla. You become you don't become part of the hunt. You become immune to the hunt. You become immune to battle. You become invulnerable, and you become an epic warrior. So it's a test. It's a challenge. If you can do it, great.
I wonder how that would play out in modern times, because you get swept up. But Valhalla, you should explain what that is, because some of our travelers might not know what Valhalla
That's the Nordic heaven that you only get to if you die in battle. It's if you're a Star Trek fan and you're a Klingon, you go to Stovacor for you. So you can't die in bed. You can't die old man. You have to die in battle. That's why Erica's always screaming at everybody. So that
Oh no, I'm going to Valhalla. Like
there's a great movie called Eric the Viking, where they're all convinced.
Love Eric the Viking,
which is based on a great children's book. The book is completely different, but from the movie. The movie's great too. But there's one scene in the movie where they're all thinking they're going to sink in this boat, and they don't want to drown, so they all grab their swords to fight each other and kill each other rather than drown, so that they can go to Valhalla.
One of my favorite scenes in that movie is actually they go to this Greek island where there has never been bloodshed.
Yes.
This is probably my favorite scene in the entire
thing. Brazil, which is a fairy realm, supposedly.
Yes. Yeah. So they go to this island, never had bloodshed. And then, of course, they're Vikings, so they stab somebody. So there's bloodshed on the island. And what happens is the island starts to sink. But they're the king on the island, and everybody's in such denial. They're like, it's not happening. Keep playing music. And the island is sinking with them on it. And it goes underwater, and only his daughter is saved because she gets on the Viking boat. Nobody else gets on the boat because the king the whole time is like, it's not happening. That could never happen. And of course, the Vikings stab somebody. So that's with Tim Robbins. It's a very
Tim Robbins and Terry Jones and Terry Gilliam. Great Monty Python-esque movie. So
yes, I wanted to make a Monty Python reference earlier when you talked about the Lady of the Lake, because Monty Python and the Holy Grail has one of the best lines, was some watery toss a sword at you. That's no system to base a government.
Now I want to talk about one of the mean ones. One of my favorites.
Let's talk about a mean one. Okay.
The Doulahan.
Yes.
Yes.
That was the one
we discussed him when we talked about Washington Irving, and we talked about the Headless Horseman, because the Doulahan is the Irish Headless Horseman. He's basically demon, ghost, fae. He carries a severed head, which is usually got some sort of power that lets him see for miles. And sometimes the horse is headless too, though, which is interesting on him.
Sometimes he doesn't carry a head at all. It's just a lantern.
Yeah, and he may whip your eyes out. He doesn't kill you. That's the thing about him. He never kills anybody, but he'll take your eyes. He'll take your hand. He'll take all parts he might need. And basically, if you see him and he doesn't bother you, that means somebody near you is going to die like a banshee. And his whip is supposedly made out of a human spine.
Oh, well, that seems uncomfortable.
It's very legit. It's very legit.
Again, Yeats brought him up. So,
yeah.
And again, ancient Celts, because they used to sever the heads of their enemies as a sign of disrespect, and the soul is based in your head. So that's what they thought anyway. But then, of course, we got the kobolds, which Germanic, or they're similar to brownies.
Yeah.
But, and they're mischievous.
Like sometimes they're just gremlins. It's interesting because, and of course, you see the most common in fantasy games as little dogs, kobolds
or lizards in early Dungeons and Dragons
and things like that.
They were combining them with the salamanders, which is another fae,
a fire spirit.
Fire spirit. But the big thing about them was they had an ability to see your sins. And they particularly were fond of seeing the sins of clergy. So they would mess with clergymen. So that would be, they would be pestered by a kobold. Well, we talked about the salamanders there a little bit because they're made up of elements that we can see. Paracelsus says, nature's made up of elements we can see, but there must be spiritual elements, counterparts of the creatures that we can't see. And those he called elementals. and that's what he was. And he thought the salamanders were the fire element.
We were talking about how can you tell them apart. So a great example is the church dog or the church grim, right? It's a black dog who protects the church graveyard in the church grounds. But then you have a mimic dog, which is described identical to the same physical description of a church grim, but what it does is it can mimic a person's voice and then lure you and then eat you, and usually hunt in packs. And then you have the black dog scenario, which will, often hunt you down, which then transfers into a hellhound stories. And there's a lot of hound type fae. There's like a whole tree system of them at some point.
Well, what's interesting about that is how much then that's been stolen into Christian theology with the hellhounds and things like that. But those go back to the Grimm. And what's always fascinating to me is like not everybody sees the Grimm when only certain people see the Grimm in certain circumstances. One thing I thought was really interesting, and this goes back to those wonderful books, the Time Life books. And it was talking about, yes, Mark can pull them off his shelf right now. The superstitions, right, is one of the superstitions I think a lot of people aren't aware of is the knocking on wood, like where that comes from. And what I thought was fascinating is this ties to Fae. Watch me tie this to Fae, everybody.
Here she goes.
Here I go. The knocking on wood was to awaken the spirits in the trees.
You were talking to the dryads and
awaken the spirits to protect you when you were walking through the forest at night. So knock on wood, that good luck thing utilized when you would walk through and wake up the fae in the forest to protect you as you were walking through. So I think that's interesting because I don't think a lot of people realize when they knock on wood that they're actually technically summoning fae to protect them.
There was the Trow, which in Dungeons and Dragons called them the Drow. They were the dark fae. They were the Unseelie. And the Trows also were basically like, similar to trolls, where they can't be in the daylight or they turn to stone. And you'd think, when you think trolls, right, we think the giant trolls of Harry Potter and Dungeons and Dragons and all that. But in the Trow, trolls were much smaller, very similar to gnomes and like that, and toad looking and all that. And they had several variants of them. They had the Kunal Trowls. They were the ones who would kidnap young human wives. And
that's convenient.
And I think Warcraft actually played
the Sea Trowls. The Sea Trowls were the ones that appeared as like half human, half fish, similar to mermaids. And when they would come fully on land, they'd have to find new skin.
It's interesting. So one thing I want to touch on, because we're going to have to wrap in a couple minutes here. But one thing, the fact that, we're talking about all these, what sound like very fantastical things. These things or have them as part of their culture,
like in that 1900s collection. Some of the people they're collecting stories from is priests and lawyers and men with high reputations mixed into and grandpa. Yeah
And I think it's interesting because even today I think I had this bookmark when I was a kid. It had a unicorn on it. It was really pretty and shiny, and it said, some things have to be believed to be seen. So I often wonder, if these creatures, these preternatural, whatever they are, right, are things that existed in a previous time more, and almost a lot of them died out like any sort of evolutionary track happens, right? But there are still some in and amongst things, and I don't know that they necessarily live forever. I'm not saying they don't. I don't know. But I think it's interesting because I go, how much are they still around life? But it's very hard to believe that you're seeing a tiny person or that you've encountered something that makes you exchange things. I know there are people that, for instance, suddenly have terrible strains of luck and things like that. And they're like, I feel like there's a dark presence. And, we could go demon and blah, blah. But I sometimes go, did you make a deal with the Fae and did not even realize you made a deal with the Fae? And if they did mate with humans at the rate that they talked about, like, I wonder how many of us have Fae lineage. You know what I mean? Like, it just opens
like
this
my High Lord Fae father to show up and take me away.
Oh, okay. Is that what's happening? That's where you're going with
I mean,
it?
that's a lot of romantasy books right now.
It is.
I'll
let your husband know that you're waiting for your
That's okay.
Your Fae.
He hawks the Honeycombings books at every.
Okay, so let's just touch this one last thing, which is, what is your favorite Fae, Val?
Ooh.
If you could be any Fae, what would it be? Mark, I'm going to ask you the same question, so think on it.
Got it.
If you could be any Fae, what would you be?
Man, that's hard.
Don't think too hard on
I
it.
like the Spriggan. They're just like badass gatekeepers.
Mm.
Like they're like unkillable. They have like the power to overlord over all other Fae and serve the king and queen of Fae. So they're sort of like a royal guard. And there's just fascinating that for as lawless as the Fae are as a whole, the fact that they have this gatekeeper and guard in place.
Okay, I'm not pleased that you chose to be the rule monger. Okay, Mark, do better than that, because I don't even want to talk to Val
It's
anymore.
about the rules.
No, you shut it.
I'm a big fan of the boggart, just because you get to become whatever everybody's afraid of. You're a bog legend. You basically anything that scares people, you get to become. Although I probably am closer to Puck, in all honesty. I'm a nice trickster, so.
Is there a Fae that only wants books? Because I feel like that's where you're at.
I don't know. I don't think so. That's more
How about
dragon.
you be a brownie in a library and make them bring cookies and milk?
Cookies and honey. Yeah.
Yeah. No, just let me hang out with the Leanna and Shay and I'm good. So
yeah. So I'm gonna go with Banshee.
Banshee?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with Banshee. Because I want to be the harbinger of doom. That's what I want to go around.
One of you is dying tonight.
That or a grim. I want to fluctuate between being a banshee and a grim, and I just want to show up and be like, "You're gonna fucking die."
Just scream.
I love it. Okay, well, Val, if people want to stalk you, how do they find you?
WillisAuthor.com. WILLISAUTHOR.com. And you can find all my links to my social media from there, blog posts where I talk about a little bit of mythology here and there that has inspired a lot of what I write and even my books.
Okay, cool. And with that, Mark, take us away from the Fae round, shall you?
All right. Well, thank you, gang, for joining us once again. We hope you enjoyed this little trip into the Fae realm. And thanks, Val, for coming on and steering us through. And hopefully keep an eye on us, erietravels.com. You can find out where we're going to be. We've got a lot of events coming up. It is spooky season, so keep up with us. And with that, again, thanks again to all our sponsors and all of our friends. And here we go. Let's just leave it with this. I will go from one of my favorite Fae's lines. If we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended, that you have all but slumbered here, whilst these visions did appear, and this weak and idle theme, no more yielding but a dream. Gentles do not reprehend, if you pardoned, we will mend. And as I am an honest Puck, and we have unearned luck, now to scape the serpent's tongue, we will make amends ere long. Else the Puck a liar call, so good night unto you all. Give me your hands if we be friends, and Robin shall restore amends, and we shall see you on the other side.